Two mutilated bodies were found in a small house on the outskirts of town. Blood dripped across the floor. The smell of decomposition mingled with the silence of the empty rooms. Behind this was a woman who couldn't let go of her grandson, turning his obsession into violence. A family was torn apart by this monstrous act. Mary Johnson lived in a small town in northern Ohio. After the death of her daughter, she took in her 10-year-old grandson, Daniel. To neighbors and friends, this seemed like a natural step. The elderly woman was trying to preserve the boy's home and family. During the first few years, her care was unquestioned. Mary provided the child with everything he needed, monitored his studies, and took him to doctor's appointments. However, gradually her attachment became excessive and alarming. Even as Daniel grew older, his grandmother rarely let him out alone. She controlled his schedule, knew all his friends, and checked his belongings. In high school, this seemed odd. His peers were given more freedom, while he remained under constant supervision. Even then, people noticed that he rarely spent time outside the house, and his attempts to make friends with female classmates quickly fizzled. Mary was particularly sensitive to her grandson's presence in the company of girls. Any intimacy provoked a sharp reaction from her. It is known that she once called Daniel's classmate and accused her of breaking up the family. Such intrusions led to a breakdown in contact. Gradually, Daniel stopped confiding in anyone about his personal affairs and preferred to avoid romantic relationships. When Daniel entered university, the situation didn't change. Mary called him several times a day, demanding detailed reports, where he was, who he was seeing, what he was doing. On the rare occasions when he didn't answer, she would drive to campus, wait for him outside the building, or ask his friends. To his friends, this seemed like intrusive control, but he himself was accustomed to such pressure and tried to avoid open conflict. There were other relatives within the family, the late father's younger sister and her husband. They repeatedly tried to intervene, talking to Mary about their grandson's need for independence. But every conversation ended in arguments. Mary claimed that only she knows what's best for Daniel, and gradually isolated him completely from other loved ones. Communication with his aunt and her family ceased. The closeness of everyday life was particularly troubling. Until the age of 20, Daniel slept in the same room with his grandmother, despite the possibility of sharing the space. Mary attributed this to a fear of being alone. For the young man, this had become normal, but to those around him, it seemed abnormal. Gradually, Daniel's life narrowed to three things: university, home, and the occasional trip to the store. Any attempts to spend time with his classmates ended in arguments. Mary would throw long fights, accuse him of betrayal, and cry for hours, demanding that he come home. Under pressure, he increasingly stayed by her side. By the age of 21, the young man found himself almost completely isolated. He had no steady girlfriend and almost no friends left. He lived by the rules established by his grandmother and rarely tried to challenge them. Her words that no one could take better care of him became a constant reminder. The situation was exacerbated by Mary's own health. She was diagnosed with hypertension and depression, and doctors prescribed medications, but she often refused to take them. Her mood fluctuated wildly, from tears to outbursts of aggression. Neighbors heard screams coming from the house several times, but they didn't intervene, dismissing them as family problems. Thus, a closed system was formed, a dependent grandmother, completely focused on her grandson, and a young man deprived of freedom of choice. Outwardly, it looked like the normal life of a small family, but internally, tensions were building, ultimately leading to tragedy. By the age of 21, Daniel was increasingly trying to spend time outside the home. University studies, new acquaintances, and a desire for independence were gradually replacing the secluded life with his grandmother. For any young man, such changes would have been natural, but for Mary, they were a threat. She perceived every step her grandson took toward independence as a betrayal. The first serious conflict arose over a girl Daniel met in the library. Her name was Sarah, and she was in a different department. Their encounters quickly developed into a close relationship, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel began spending evenings away from home. Mary reacted extremely sensitively. She made scenes, accused her grandson of forgetting who cared about him. She called Sarah, talked about her bad influence, and even threatened her, demanding that they stop seeing each other. Ultimately, the relationship quickly ended. After this intervention, his grandmother became even more insistent. She took control of his schedule, demanding that he be home by a certain time, checking his bag, personal belongings, and even his emails. According to friends, Daniel became withdrawn, rarely sharing his experiences and trying to keep his personal life to himself. Mary justified her behavior with concern. She claimed the world was dangerous, that people around him could exploit him. But gradually her words became more and more accusatory. She implied that any attempt to leave her would be tantamount to betrayal. For the boy, this created a constant feeling of guilt. The situation was complicated by Mary's deteriorating health. She complained of pain, often saying she felt on edge. These words were accompanied by reproaches. If Daniel was late, she accused him of making her sick. This pressure made the young man even more dependent. Several times he tried to spend the weekend with his classmates, but returned home after heated phone calls. In one of his text messages, he confessed to a friend that he was afraid to leave his grandmother alone. However, this was accompanied by a growing internal irritation. He realized his life was being lived under restrictions, but he couldn't find the strength to resist. A significant incident occurred on the eve of the winter holidays. Daniel announced he wanted to go to another city with friends. Mary became hysterical, screaming that he was leaving her and that one day she would break down and do something to herself. Ultimately, the trip was canceled. Neighbors later reported hearing screams and arguing coming from the house that evening, but no one dared intervene. At the same time, Daniel began spending more time at the university, delaying his return home. He'd linger in the library and sit in cafes just to cut down on the hours he spent with his grandmother. But this led to even greater conflicts. Mary would show up at the university, demand explanations, and make scenes right in front of his friends. Gradually, the situation began to be perceived as abnormal by those around him. Several professors noticed the young man's strange behavior. He seemed depressed, often tired, and sometimes skipped classes. But no official complaints were filed, so the university did not intervene. That spring, Daniel made a new friend, Lisa. She was more assertive and tried to resist her grandmother's interference. However, she soon became the target of aggression. Mary visited her house several times, confronted her parents, and claimed that the girl was destroying the family. This caused tension and eventually led to a breakup. By this time, Mary's behavior had become obsessive. She not only controlled her grandson, but also constantly expressed jealousy, reproaching him for spending his time with other people. In conversations with neighbors, she referred to him as her only one, emphasizing that no one should interfere. By the summer, their relationship had reached a breaking point. Daniel increasingly considered moving into the dorms, but he hesitated. He knew any attempt to leave would lead to a violent reaction. The tension between them grew, and conflicts became increasingly heated. Summer marked a turning point in Mary and Daniel's relationship. On the surface, their lives remained the same: home, university, and the occasional shopping trip. But within the family, tensions were mounting. Daniel increasingly tried to distance himself, and his grandmother increased the pressure. The young man's slightest attempts to spend time outside the home ended in heated arguments. The first serious conflict erupted in June. Daniel returned home later than usual after meeting his classmates. Mary started a fight, accusing him of spending time with strangers instead of with her. During the argument, she threw objects at him and later burst into tears, claiming that her grandson had disappointed her. This episode marked the beginning of a series of similar outbursts. In July, the situation escalated. Daniel finally decided to talk about moving into the dorms. He tried to explain that he needed independence, that this was common practice for students. Mary perceived this as betrayal. She screamed that he was abandoning her, that he would be left alone and couldn't bear it. According to neighbors, their screams could be heard for several hours. That evening, Daniel went to see a friend, but returned the next day, hesitant to leave the house permanently. Mary's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. She would sit silently for hours, then suddenly become aggressive. Sometimes she would accuse her grandson of cheating on her with other people. Such statements alarmed those around her, but they rarely reached the ears of others. The woman carefully concealed her words from outsiders. In August, Daniel made a new acquaintance, Emily. She was independent and supported his desire to move. Their relationship developed quickly, but it was precisely this relationship that finally led Mary to lose control. She began openly stalking her grandson, visiting campus, and asking his friends who Emily was. When Daniel admitted he was dating her, a major conflict erupted in the house. During their argument, Mary threatened that she wouldn't allow anyone to destroy their family. She claimed the girl wanted to take him away forever and promised to do everything to prevent that. This became a difficult ordeal for Daniel. He spent more and more time at Emily's, tried to spend less time at home. Meanwhile, his grandmother took steps to keep her grandson in check. She hid his things so he couldn't leave for long, persuaded neighbors to keep an eye on him, and spread rumors about the girl. According to classmates, Daniel appeared depressed and said he felt trapped. By September, the tension had escalated into an open confrontation. Daniel announced he was going to rent a place with Emily. This conversation was the last straw. Mary responded aggressively, shouting that she would never let him leave. For several weeks, conflicts recurred almost daily. In October, an event occurred that foreshadowed the tragedy. Neighbors heard loud screams and slamming doors at Mary's house. The next day, Daniel showed up for class with a bruise on his face. He was evasive when his friends questioned him, but admitted that the situation at home was becoming unbearable. The woman became increasingly withdrawn, and her actions took on a premeditated nature. She began buying kitchen knives and keeping them in plain sight. A neighbor recalled Mary once saying, "If he leaves, I won't survive, and no one will be happy." These words weren't taken seriously at the time. In the fall, Daniel finally decided to move, but he put off talking to his grandmother. He feared her reaction, but at the same time, he didn't want to break off their relationship. Emily insisted he make a choice. For Mary, this signaled that her hold on her grandson was slipping. Thus, by late autumn, the situation in the house had reached a critical point. A chasm had opened between the grandmother's addiction and the young man's desire for freedom, growing deeper with each passing day. It was during this period that events began to spiral toward a tragic outcome, soon leading to a bloody crime. One evening in early November, tensions reached a breaking point. Daniel returned home later than usual. He spent several hours with Emily discussing their moving plans. When he entered the house, Mary was already waiting for him. The room was dimly lit, dinner was prepared on the kitchen table, but the atmosphere was tense. A conflict erupted from the very first minute. The woman demanded that he stop seeing Emily, screaming that she was destroying their family. For the first time, Daniel openly declared that he wasn't going to live by her rules and was ready to leave. These words became a trigger. According to neighbors, it was that evening that particularly loud screams were heard coming from the house, audible throughout the street. The argument escalated into a physical altercation. Daniel tried to go to his room, but Mary blocked his path. She had a kitchen knife in her hand, ready. During the conflict, Emily entered the house. She had come to help Daniel finish packing. For Mary, her appearance was the final blow. Events unfolded rapidly. The woman lunged at the girl, stabbing her with a knife. Emily sustained several wounds to the chest and abdomen and died instantly. Daniel, who tried to protect her, became the next victim. Mary stabbed her grandson, then continued acting in a state of shock. According to investigators, both bodies bore multiple stab wounds. After the murder, the woman made no attempt to escape. She closed the doors, sat in the living room, and remained near the bodies for several hours. Neighbors noted that the lights remained on in the house for a long time, but the silence seemed unusual after the screams. Only in the morning did one neighbor call the police, concerned about the lack of movement. Arriving officers discovered a crime scene. Emily's body lay on the living room floor, with Daniel's nearby. Evidence of a struggle extended from the kitchen to the hallway. Blood soaked the carpet and walls. A knife with Mary's fingerprints was nearby. The woman was sitting in a chair, not resisting arrest. Initial police efforts were aimed at establishing the precise sequence of events. Forensic experts recorded the time of death as being in the evening. An autopsy revealed multiple stab wounds inflicted with great force. Experts concluded the murder occurred during a state of intense emotional arousal. During interrogation, Mary gave inconsistent testimony. She claimed she was protecting her family and couldn't allow my grandson to be taken away. When asked why her grandson had been beaten, she gave illogical answers, citing fear of losing him. A later examination confirmed she had a mental disorder associated with addiction and delusional ideas. The investigation established that the crime had not been planned in detail, but the knife had been prepared in advance. This indicated that the woman had considered the possibility of violence. Neighbors confirmed in their statements that they had heard frequent screams and threats in recent weeks. The atmosphere inside the house remained eerie, even for experienced investigators. Police officers noted that such scenes were rare in small American towns. Photos from the scene showed bloodstains on the walls, overturned furniture, and Daniel's belongings packed into a suitcase he hadn't managed to carry. The case immediately received widespread media attention. Local television stations reported on a shocking double murder committed by an elderly woman. Journalists focused on the unusual circumstances, the murder of a grandson by a grandmother, and the motive linked to pathological obsession. By this point, the case had already entered the official investigation phase. Investigators had collected evidence, collected fingerprints, and seized Mary's personal notes. Her diaries contained entries describing her fear of losing her grandson and her hatred of his girlfriends. These entries became key evidence that her condition had been unstable long before the tragedy. Thus, a night that began with an ordinary family quarrel culminated in a brutal crime. 2 people lost their lives, and the woman who for many years considered herself the family's protector became its destroyer. After her arrest, Mary Johnson was placed in the county jail. She offered no resistance, remained calm, occasionally crying and repeating that she did everything for her family. An investigation began immediately. Forensic experts, psychiatrists, and county prosecutors were brought in. The main evidence was found at the crime scene: a knife with her fingerprints, traces of blood, and diary entries. Police also interviewed neighbors, who confirmed frequent arguments and threats. This testimony indicated a systematic nature of the conflicts and the premeditation of the aggressive actions. A forensic examination determined that the blows were inflicted sequentially and with great force. Emily's body bore more than 10 stab wounds, while Daniel's bore 8. The experts noted that some of the blows were inflicted after the victims were no longer able to resist. This indicated a state of emotional distress, but did not rule out deliberate action. During interrogation, Mary's behavior was inconsistent. She sometimes claimed to be protecting her grandson from bad women, sometimes admitting she couldn't allow him to leave. Her statements were confused and filled with delusional ideas. As a result, the court ordered a psychiatric evaluation. The expert report stated that she suffered from a chronic mental disorder associated with addiction and distorted perception of reality. However, the doctors emphasized that at the time of the crime, she was able to understand the factual nature of her actions. This conclusion became key to the trial. The trial generated considerable public interest. Journalists, relatives of the deceased Emily, and city residents were present in the courtroom. The prosecutor insisted on a life sentence, citing the brutality of the crime. The defense attorney emphasized the defendant's mental state, arguing that she needed treatment, not punishment. Witness testimony only heightened the gravity of the charges. Daniel's friends said he repeatedly complained of pressure from his grandmother, but was afraid to leave her. Emily's parents testified in court that their daughter had fallen victim to someone else's illness and obsessive addiction. After several hearings, the court found Mary Johnson guilty of murdering 2 people. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The court also recommended mandatory psychiatric observation. The case was resolved, but it left a deep mark on the small town. The family was completely destroyed. The grandson and his girlfriend died, and the grandmother, who for many years considered herself the only protector, turned into a criminal. For neighbors and acquaintances, it became a tragic example of how a hidden obsession can lead to a cruel end.